What's going on, everyone? Welcome to No Timeouts, a football show coming at you from the Score Studio. My name is Jonah Birnbaum. That is Dan Wilkins. That is Tyler MacKillop. That is Justin Boone. You know them. You love them. Fellas, so much to get to on today's show. Let's just dive right in. Week 1 is 2 weeks away, which is wild. So let's continue previewing some of the teams we haven't gotten to so far. Last week, on our previous episode, we looked at teams with bounce back or breakout potential. Now let's shift our focus to the presumptive juggernauts, the locks to make the playoffs in 2024. Now, let me just clarify something preemptively here. You guys are going to be confused as to why nobody mentions the Chiefs or the 49ers in this segment. It's because they're not allowed to. I didn't allow them because they're too obvious, right? They're the reigning conference champions, perennial powerhouses. They're going to make the playoffs. Spoiler alert. So with that said, let's look at the locks, not including KC and San Francisco. And Boone, we'll let you go first this week. Dude, who's a lock to make the playoffs in 2024?
I questioned the segment initially because I was like, we're just going to talk about all the best teams? Like, that's kind of weird. But I've seen some of the teams we're picking for this. There's at least one that's going to be very interesting in a second. But I'm going to go with the Texans for my first one. I mean, this team won 10 games last year. CJ Stroud looked like the next great young quarterback coming up. They had a bunch of guys breaking out, right? Like Nico Collins looking like a number one receiver. Tank Dell, phenomenal. DeMeco Ryans a great young coach. They got lucky that Bobby Slowick now is coming back. Bobby Slowick, a phenomenal offensive coordinator. They had issues on the offensive line last year with injuries. They managed to play through that and figure that out. So this team was good. And then you figure, okay, maybe they're going to have a little bit of a slump now this year. How can they match that? They made some very smart moves in the offseason. They continue to add to that defense. They bring in Danielle Hunter. They bring in Danico Autry. They go out and get Joe Mixon to help in the backfield. Last year, they had Devin Singletary, right? Like, no shade at Devin Singletary, former Bill. The guy is an underrated football player, but Joe Mixon, a bit of an upgrade there. And then they get Stephon Diggs, and even though Stephon Diggs probably getting to a phase of his career where maybe he's going to start to decline, you bring him in to make potentially the best receiver room in the league now, right? And continue to give CJ Stroud weapons to work with. So 10 wins last year. This year, I think we're not only going to see them win playoff games, I think there's a very good chance that the Texans are going to be in the AFC Championship and potentially make it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to poke holes in this roster because I'm like Jacksonville last year had coming off a playoff year thinking they were going to take the next step. They didn't make the investments Houston did, like you mentioned. If I'm poking holes in this team, maybe their run game doesn't come together because the offensive line did have struggles with injuries most notably. And I'm not a huge Joe Mixon guy. He's never been a super efficient back in this league. And maybe the run game doesn't open up their downfield passing game like it was last year because Stroud was one of the best quarterbacks in the league downfield. Maybe defenses are more inept or more looking to take care of that area of the field defensively. But they had a great talent. They have fantastic coaching. And then they found ways to get better, which not a lot of teams are able to do off the big year. Maybe there's a CJ Stroud sophomore slump. I'm struggling to find ways to say anything bad about the Texans going into this year. So
they're so good, and CJ Stroud is so exciting that I think it's easy to overlook how complete this team is. But you look at what their run defense did last year, for instance, top 10 by expected points contributed. They were a top 10 team. Also in terms of coverage, according to Pro Football Focus, they were top 5 in terms of pressuring the quarterback. Like, there's so much positive going on with this team beyond CJ Stroud. To your guys' point, like, they're a complete team. They're going to do some damage this year. But with that said, T, who's your lock to make the playoffs?
I want to keep this quick because I think the Lions are just a no-doubt team in that category. Offensively, we know how good they are. They were a top 5 scoring offense last year. I think they found a way to get better because Jonah Jackson technically didn't grade as well as a pass blocker or run blocker as Kevin Zeitler is, who steps in his spots. The offensive line will be the best in the league. We know the offense is very good. Jahmyr Gibbs was, I believe, second or third in the league in rushes of 15-plus yards, despite only having like 200 carries on the season. And then defensively is where you have questions. Aiden Hutchinson, to me, this is the guy that's going to win Defensive Player of the Year because the numbers last year tell me that he can be even better. Only 11.5 sacks, but he was a player that had a over 21% pass rush win rate from PFF, 6th best in the league, and his pressures on the season only trailed Micah Parsons, 101. This is a guy who's on the rise, who I think gets 15-plus sacks on the season, helps take this defense to another level, which already has an elite linebacking core that was great against the run. Question is whether or not they can make plays in the secondary because they were one of the worst pass defenses in the NFL last year, despite Hutchinson being able to cause some havoc. They had Terry Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw in the draft. I really like Arnold, think he can step in right away. They add Carlton Davis, who I'm a little bit skeptical on how high level play they can get, how high of a level of play they can get from him. Meek Robertson steps in too, so there's more depth. This team said, hey, we had a great year. We're not going to sit in it, much like Houston. They said, we're going to find ways to get better and answer the questions that people have, and I kind of think they've done exactly that. I see no world where this team doesn't make the playoffs. I think they're going to win the NFC, to be honest with you.
Yeah, they were awesome last year. I think they've gotten even better. I don't have a lot to add to that other than the fact that I think that they're also just such a likable team, too. What was it, 30 years between division titles or home playoff games? Whatever it was, the Lions are the team that everyone wants to see win now, and I think they're going to be a fun team to follow.
Yeah.
Definitely, 100%. But with that, Wilkie, who you got? Who's your lock?
I'm going to go with the Rams, and if one of you could please tell me how their preseason win total is sitting at 8.5, I would love to know, because this is a team that was in the playoffs last year, won 10 games, including 7 of their last 8, and then they went into Detroit and almost knocked off the Lions in the wild card round, as you broke it down, one of the best teams in the league. Look, we know their offense is great. There's stars all over the field. If part of the reason people are a little skeptical of them is the retirement of Aaron Donald, I get it. Best defensive player I've ever seen. Impossible to replace. But if there's one thing the Rams can try, it's to recreate him in the aggregate. Mostly joking.
Shout out the Moneyball reference, man. I love that.
Mostly joking, because I don't think that's possible.
Yeah.
I don't think replacing Aaron Donald is the same thing as replacing Carlos Pena. But I do really like what the Rams are doing on defense. They doubled up on pass rushers early in the draft, getting both Jared Verse and Braden Fiske. They're also going to be sliding in alongside Kobe Turner, who was one of my favorite players in the draft last year. And then you add in a couple veteran signings in Tre'Davious White and Cameron Curl, also John Johnson III coming back. I just really like what they're doing on defense. I think they could be good. And so, to me, this is an easy double-digit win team, a playoff lock, and honestly, a sneaky Super Bowl contender, too.
Yeah, I think the Rams are a good team. If I had to try to figure out why that win total is a little bit lower, are people scared about Matt Stafford maybe getting injured? We saw him get a little dinged up already. He's dealt with some injuries in recent years. He's getting up there in age. That might be a concern. Behind an offensive line that's also dealing with injuries right now. They've kind of been banged up in the preseason. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. The one guy that I'm not worried about in terms of injury is Puka Nacua. I know that some people, even fantasy-wise, we're seeing him drop a little bit in ADP, but I'm scooping that up all day. He's fallen from the end of the first round into the second round. But Sean McVay already came out and said there's no doubt that Puka's going to be out there in week 1. So I'm very confident that he'll be out there, that he's going to be a good fantasy asset. And I'm pretty confident this team is going to be really good this year, too.
Yeah, I mean, if there's only one thing I could quibble with, it's that the Oakland A's were trying to replace Jason Giambi, not Carlos Pena. They were trying to replace him with Carlos Pena.
You're right.
I'll forgive you for that, because this is a football show, not a baseball show. But if anyone does want to reminisce about the early aughts Oakland A's, hit me up afterwards. Boone, let's throw it back to you, man. You got another lock or what?
We will not be hitting you up after. My other lock that I'm going to say is a team that I already talked about in recent weeks, and I'm not going to have to spend too much time on them. It's the Falcons. Whew. And when we talked about them last time, I went over everything, right? The weak division, the very easy schedule, the easiest strength of schedule based on Vegas projected win totals, the arrival of Kirk Cousins. You have Michael Penix Jr. backing him up just in case Kirk Cousins gets hurt again. You have the new coaching staff there. All these things are exciting. And then since the last time we talked about them, they go add more weapons. They go out and get Matthew Judon. They go out and sign Justin Simmons. Now they have arguably the best safety duo in the league with Jesse Bates and Simmons back there. So the one area of weakness, the one thing that maybe I was a little bit worried about when I talked about them last time, they're going to great lengths to try to improve that spot. So I'm very, very confident that they're going to be a lock this year.
I'm just mad at them. I'm mad at them for spending their first-round pick on Michael Penix. You signed Kirk Cousins for a huge deal. You're going all in to win with him. You could have used that pick on a pass rusher, a corner. What would this offense look like if it had Roma Dunze on the outside with Drake London and Kyle Pitts? It makes me wonder what could have been, and instead we're sitting with Michael Penix on the bench for multiple years while Kirk Cousins plays. I mean, I just don't think they maximize enough. I agree. I think they're a playoff team, but I'm just upset with them. I can't get over that.
Yeah, I agree. I've always had major issues with the way they built out this team with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, and then they're going to trade and spend money on filling the positions I was hoping they would be able to grab in the draft. But Judon, I don't know where he's at coming back from injury, if we can get that same level of play, but this guy was sneaky one of the best edge rushers in the league the 2 years prior. He was somebody who's, close to 30 sacks the 2 seasons prior to his injury. So I got no problem with the Falcons. I think they're the team that everybody talks about to win this division, that sometimes you see that team not live up to expectation. I see no reason why they don't. So,
and when you only need to win 10 games to win your division, it certainly makes it easier to envision Atlanta, getting in there for the first time in a long time. First time in a long time for the Falcons. T, you got another lock or what?
Yeah, we're going to push ourselves a little bit.
I love it.
Here we go.
We're gonna go with a team that I think people will be surprised to hear is a guaranteed to make the playoffs, the Jags. So awful finish to last year. Started 8-3, closed the year 1-5. Couple big problems being not closing drives in the red zone. They were 22nd those final 6 weeks in red zone touchdown rate, and then the secondary let them down in a big way. There's a lot of changes coming to this team, and I really think it's very well thought out from Doug Peterson in terms of their acquisitions and what they acquired. You guys can check it out here. But you're looking at a couple players they let go in Darius Williams and Rayshon Jenkins. Those were their 2 leading tacklers last year, so it's kind of eye-popping to see them let them go. But they bring in Darnell Savage, they bring in Ronald Darby. Those are 2 players that they believe fit their scheme better, which is set for a massive change. So Mike Caldwell's gone. Ryan Nielsen is in. He was with the Falcons as the DC last year. This was a Jags team that just played a ton of zone, one of the highest rates in the league, and just were consistently picked apart in the secondary if that really good pass rush didn't get after offensive lines to get to the quarterback. Now they're going to be in a lot more too high shells, a lot more man. Nielsen was one of the highest rates of man in the league, and I think it suits them much better to be able to be more aggressive in the secondary and let this pass rush eat while giving those couple of safety spots ways to limit explosive plays. It's going to take some time for this team, I think, to completely learn defensively how to fit Nielsen's scheme. And I think they might give up a lot of points, but I think by the end of the year they really figure things out and the schedule gets a lot softer. Offensively, though, this is what I love about this Jags team is the fact that they're bringing in Brian Thomas, who was one of the best deep ball contested catch players in college football last year. This guy had 18 deep targets being targets of 20-plus air yards. He caught 14 of them. Nearly 80% of those passes he came down with. And Gabe Davis is a good downfield player as well. Sneaky, Trevor Lawrence has been very good as a downfield passer, and they want to play into that. It's very obvious with these acquisitions, being that they have, I think Lawrence was 9th in completion percentage and 8th in percentage of passes that were being downfield. So he attacks the deep area of the field consistently, and he's very good doing it. I think they're looking to do that in a better facet this year. I think they can execute this, and I do think that this defense is better adding in Armstead as well to help their run defense, which is already pretty good. So I think this is a team everybody's looking past that can, not having a lot of expectations, and I think that's going to help them in a big way this year.
Yeah, I think it's fair to wonder at this point, 3 years into his career, whether Trevor Lawrence is a great quarterback or merely a good one. But in any event, he's going to need more help from the running game in Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Last year, they were one of the worst in the league by expected points contributed. I think they had the lowest yards per carry, or certainly bottom 5 in the NFL. He can't do it all by himself. They're really going to need to become more dynamic offensively if they want to get to where they hope they would get to with Trevor Lawrence under center. But just to round out the segment, Wilkie, I know you got a controversial lock for us to wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the Jags are kind of controversial too. But
They are. They got problems.
I'm a Trevor Lawrence believer, so I don't have a huge problem with it, but I'm interested to see how you're going to feel about this one because I know you're a Chargers fan, but I'm going to stay in LA and go with the Chargers. Yeah, I understand why people are pretty down on them after the offseason they had. They let Mike Williams go. They let Keenan Allen go, and they weren't real eager to replace them, even with Malik Neighbors on the board at number 5. I'm sure that's who you probably wanted with that spot. But for me, Joe Alt was always going to be the pick there. The Chargers want to run the ball. They're going to run the ball just like every Jim Harbaugh team ever has. And with Joe Alt, and joining Rashawn Slater, they have probably the best young duo of offensive tackles in the game. And to me, a run-heavy offense is kind of the perfect zig to the rest of the league's zag when all defenses around the league are built to stop the pass now. That means that most of them don't have the personnel to really match up when you come out in heavy formations and run it right at them all game long. And as much as we want to rag on Greg Roman for how he did in Baltimore, he knows how to scheme up that type of run game. And honestly, for me, you marry in a pass game with a top 5 quarterback in the game. For some reason, that's controversial. We don't need to get into that. Peyton Manning agrees with me, so I'm going to take the dub. That's a fun offense to me. That could be a really good offense. And honestly, this is something that we're probably not talking about enough. I think the defense has a chance to look very different and potentially good under Jesse Minter. This is a guy who oversaw the best defense in the nation at Michigan last year. You can say the NFL is a different animal. I agree. But this is also the same system that Mike Macdonald was running with the Ravens that he's now taken to Seattle. Both these guys learned under Wink Martindale in Baltimore, and it's really just a pressure-oriented, disguise-heavy scheme that gives offensive coordinators a lot of problems. So, I think this scheme can really maximize what the Chargers do have on defense. And remember, there are a couple superstars in Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, and Derwin James. So, yeah, give me the Chargers as a bit of an upset in the AFC. I know most of you guys won't agree with it, but I can see them being a wildcard team.
I won't attack you too much. I mean, I agree with what you said about the defense. For sure, the offensive line. My concerns would be, one, that Herbert coming in with this foot injury now, yes, he's healthy, but is that going to impact him throughout the season? Is he not going to be able to run as much?
Yeah.
Because that's part of his game, right? And they were going to need that this year. Then you look at the skill positions, very unproven receiving core. You could make an argument for a couple of those guys, but very unproven. And the running backs, if you're looking to establish it, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, there's durability concerns there. Dobbins coming off an Achilles tear. I always get the Achilles and the ACL screwed up, but coming off an Achilles tear, we don't see many running backs almost ever come back from that and produce like they used to a year later. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it takes 2 years. Sometimes they never come back from that. So I'm concerned that they don't really have the pieces in place to be the team that they want to be, and it might take a season or two. So I think that's a very bold claim to suggest that they're a lock for the playoffs this year in year one under Harbaugh.
I feel like that's the slogan that's like on the exit, like going out to the field at Charger Stadium. It may take a season or two.
Yeah, I think it's a 2-year thing. I think they're very well coached. Like bringing Minter in is awesome. I don't like Rowan very much, but I definitely agree that's the direction they're going. They run the football a lot. My biggest problem is the defense. I mean, they just let everybody go in that defense, especially in the middle at the tackle spots. So I don't know how good they'll be against the run, because
they weren't doing much for them last year.
No, that's true. That's definitely true. But for some reason, the Niners wanted Sebastian Joseph Day for the stretch run in their Super Bowl run last year. So I guess some teams see something in him. Yeah, my biggest concern is defense. I think Joey Bosa can't stay on the field. Derwin James just doesn't seem to have the same juice. And I just don't know who's going to be doing a good job covering in the secondary. So I would kill to see this team make the playoffs. I would love that.
Well, allow me to provide the optimism for you
yeah,
and
I
our
don't have a
production
lot.
room.
Yeah.
Get some Chargers fans in there.
You gotta love the pessimism of a fan.
Hey, man, fortune favors the bold, and that was as bold a prediction as we got for the segment. So
you're welcome.
We tip our hat to you. On that note, fellas, let's say what up to our virtual boy, the Score's lead NFL reporter, Josh Tolentino. Josh, what's going on, dude?
Hey, guys, a pleasure to be back here at No Timeouts. Certainly a lot to discuss. Jonah, as you say, the season just 2 weeks away. Plenty happening around the league as we gear up for week one.
Man, so much going on. Let's start with, I suppose, the juiciest story to break this week, possibly the entire offseason, Tua's comments about Brian Flores. So for those who aren't familiar, during a recent podcast appearance, Dolphins QB Tua Tagovailoa, he kind of went off on his former head coach, Brian Flores, who is now the defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings. He called him a terrible person, and he outlined some of the cutting things that Flores would say to him while they were working together in Miami, like he sucks, he doesn't belong. Flores owned that criticism, and he wished Tua well, and he vowed to learn from the experience, certainly from Tua's perspective of the experience. But Josh, you covered this Dolphins team during their time together in Miami. I know you still have connects in the Dolphins organization. What's your take on this situation between Tua and his former head coach?
Yeah, guys, I was down there Tua's rookie year. I watched it all unfold up front, and obviously now we're here years later, and a lot has developed since in terms of, guys, I was a little surprised because Tua has some truth serum to him, and we've seen that throughout the summer, negotiating his contract issue through the public lens. When he said the market is the market, he made it very clear that he was upset. But over the past 2 years, since Brian Flores' firing, he has really sidestepped this specific issue. So just a couple days ago, I spoke to someone really close to Tua who communicates with Tua on a daily basis. And this person, they admitted they were even surprised that Tua went to this extent of his comments, but it's a reality of what Tua was dealing with on a daily basis down there during his rookie year and really throughout the early parts of his career. So when you really just dive in and digest what Tua said, the best part about all of this is that obviously Brian Flores, now the defensive coordinator here with the Minnesota Vikings, he has regular media sessions with local reporters up there. He actually had to address the comments, I believe, like the following day after Tua spoke. And I mean, there's really a three-way part to look at it. You look at what Tua went through, you look at how Mike McDaniel came in. But let's start with, I guess, the root of the issue, which was Brian Flores. As you guys are well aware, and audiences, I mean, this guy comes from the Bill Belichick tree, who, I mean, this guy was calling Tom Brady, I mean, similar words, using similar vocabulary in terms of his coaching style. So I think that's where we have to start, and then the dialogue can continue from there, because Brian Flores grew up in Bill Belichick's system, dealing with him every single day. But I think, as we turn this into a conversation, not all players are going to be receptive to that type of coaching. And obviously we've seen that here from Tua and his comments this week.
Yeah, Boone, I want to let you chime in.
I mean, we talked about this a bit during the week already, but I think it's a failure of coaching, right? Whether you're a coach, whether you're a manager, when you have a team of people under you, you have to understand all the different personalities. And I mean, I've managed some of the people sitting on this set right now. You have to learn which buttons to push, how to lift people up. And there's going to be personalities that need that kick in the butt. There's going to be personalities that need to be coddled. There's going to be some people that you're going to have to put that carrot out in front of them and make them chase that thing. And you're going to work together to try to help them get to their goals. And I think this clearly, to me, is just Flores seeing that aspect of Bill Belichick, which I think Belichick probably does a more nuanced job of this, and he probably does do a lot of the things that I just mentioned. But some of his assistant coaches probably look at it and they go, he's got this hard-nosed approach, and that's what I have to emulate. And they don't have the success and the gravitas that Belichick has. And then, they go out and try to do this and maybe just get it purely wrong. Like, clearly, Tua's a guy that did not respond to this at all, where I will say, like, personally for me, I'm someone that I want you to tell me what I can't do, and then I'm going to go show you why I can. I think that would work a little bit. Now, maybe not telling me that I'm terrible every single day, like that's, definitely doesn't seem the greatest, but there are coaches out there like Mike Tomlin who talk about his job is to coach up players. He's not just there to put a system in. You have these different personalities that you have to work with, and I just think there's some coaches, and even if you look at just the world over, there's managers out there that get this wrong all the time.
Yeah. I mean, you've told me that I suck and I don't belong every day. We've worked together.
Only that one time when I kicked you out of the Score Fantasy Football League. That was true. That did happen.
Was deserving. That was performance-based. But I would say I responded positively to your relentless torrent of abuse. It really served me, man, so thank you. Josh, did you have any more points you wanted to make, serious points?
Yeah, really just looking again at Brian Flores, I mean, and the situation that he was placed in. I mean, he arrives there. It's his first gig as a head coach. He feels like he's worked his whole life towards this opportunity. Flo, another person I obviously covered on a daily basis down there in Miami. But as we know, and, the lawsuit, obviously, towards the NFL and the Dolphins, but he was put in a position to fail. Ownership, Stephen Ross, I mean, they made it very clear that they were tanking for Tua that season that he came in. Obviously, it's been reported that Brian Flores had preference for Justin Herbert, and, that goes in line with Tua's comments of, you shouldn't be here. But again, from the very beginning, Brian Flores was kind of put in a tricky situation in terms of, like, the ownership set him up to fail. And, obviously this did not work out with Tua. It did not work out with other offensive players. Brian Flores, he struggled to cultivate strong relationships, specifically on that side of the ball. But I mean, you guys, look at some of the guys that he's coached with the Patriots. I feel like there'd be a list of guys who'd sign up to back him up. And, even when Brian Flores made his comments to acknowledge his mistakes, and, he said he wanted to grow. I mean, a couple of Vikings players, Josh Metellus and Harrison Phillips, backed him up and, like, literally flanked him at the podium this week to show him their support. And then just really to put it all full circle, bringing in Mike McDaniel, the total opposite in terms of personality, fit, approach, and really look at his early interactions with Tua. I mean, he backed up Tua, not just by saying, I'm going to get to know you, but he literally spent, from what I've been told and what's been reported, hundreds of hours churning through thousands of individual reps from Tua. Tua was wearing a GoPro early on in Mike McDaniel's tenure down there, and Mike McDaniel would just churn through that film, and he did not care about the result of the throw, but he just wanted to learn Tua, the left-handed thrower, so that he could set up his scheme for that. He could set up pre-snap formations for that, and just quick game stuff to catapult him as a left-handed thrower. And obviously we've seen Tua enjoy success, and he's obviously earned that big contract that he just signed this season to lock him in as their franchise quarterback. But you really do hope at some point that there can be closure between the two parties, Brian Flores and Tua Tagovailoa, whether that happens this season, several seasons down the line, because you did like to see that Brian Flores acknowledged that. He said, I'm human, I have to grow from this. And now, obviously Tua can go back to the Dolphins as they try to compete in the AFC, and Brian Flores tries to stick it out here in the NFC North, continuing to install in the principles of his defense.
I think the thing that I think about is just the fact that when you say that they kind of can come together and move on from this, it's kind of tough to see that happening, especially with the fact that we talked about this pre-show of how's Brian Flores getting himself a head coaching job with the way that he's been going with the league, the way that this has gone with Tua. It's going to be interesting. I find it funny that we go, we have McDaniels, we have Flores, we've had Joe Judge. Those guys don't seem to have much of a feel for, managing an entire roster. But then Mike Vrabel plays for Bill Belichick. Mm-hmm. He's been a guy that, is very, very well respected by every player that seems to have played with him. So it seems to get across with the players. It seems like the guys who have small roles in his coaching staff don't have that full understanding of how to manage a team day to day. So.
Yeah, it's not an easy job, and I think it showed a lot of character and a lot of emotional maturity for Brian Flores to respond the way that he did, because I think it would have been very easy to minimize and to say, no, Tua misinterpreted, or to simply accuse him of not being cut out for life in the NFL. But I think he did a really, really admirable job of saying, look, I'm recognizing that my coaching tactics were ineffective, with this particular player, and a really important player, obviously. And I think that shows a certain maturity and perhaps an adeptness at growing and at learning the ways in which he can I think position himself to be an even more attractive head coaching candidate moving forward. Fellas, I think we're having some audio issues with our boy Josh. That's okay. He was here for a good time, not for a long time. That's fine, because we got other things to talk about. And specifically, we're going to talk quarterbacks, because nobody cares about any other position, as they shouldn't. Josh is back in, fellas. It's another Shyamalan twist. Got to keep your head on the swivel on this show. Josh, good to have you back, brother. One thing we want to talk about with you is the quarterback play from some rookies that we've seen throughout this preseason, because there's a lot of them generating a lot of headlines. We got Caleb Williams, we got Jaden Daniels, not to mention Bo Nix, Drake May, but let's focus on those first two guys in particular. What are your impressions so far of Williams and Daniels this preseason, and what are your expectations for those two moving forward?
Yeah, guys, apologies for those technical difficulties, but as we dive into this rookie quarterback class, I think we got to start with pick one, like what you say, Caleb Williams, and it says it all right here as the Bears, preparing to play their last preseason game, I believe tonight. They've already ruled him out in terms of they're focused on the regular season when it comes to Caleb Williams. And in speaking with a few people within the Bears front office just a few days ago, they are most excited, as we've seen this in training camp. Obviously this team has been premiered on Hard Knocks with HBO, but also the two preseason games. Caleb Williams and his ability to make off-schedule completions, to create outside of the pocket when under pressure. That is what they're most excited about when it comes to Caleb. He was obviously one of the most prolific passers in USC history. And he's set up for success when you think about this entire rookie class and who's going to succeed. right away. This is a franchise that has worked on improving their offensive line over the past few years before Caleb arrived to Chicago. And then just look at the weapons. I mean, what rookie quarterback steps in to a situation where you've got DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, a first-round pick who played in the championship game this most recent season. Their tight end, Cole Kmet. And I know the set is a little, wary on DeAndre Swift, but that's still a running back who has produced here over the past several seasons. So weapons all around him, a decent and improving offensive line. Caleb Williams, certainly in terms of who's going to succeed the most within the immediate, I think you got to go with Caleb here in Chicago.
Right on. And just in terms of what you've seen from Jaden Daniels, how stoked are you? How bullish are you about his prospects moving forward?
Yeah, Dan Quinn announced earlier this week that he's the starter, and I think really look at the OC situation there with Cliff Kingsbury. I think the scheme there is going to try to mask some issues that the Bears, as I mentioned, the Bears have improved their offensive line. I'd say Washington's is nowhere near on par. They're definitely towards the bottom of the league, specifically weak at offensive tackle. So you hope Cliff Kingsbury's scheme can mask some of those issues as they try to improve the personnel with Jaden Daniels here over the next couple seasons. But in speaking with scouts and evaluators ahead of this most recent draft with all these quarterbacks mixed in, some guys ranked Drake May, Jaden Daniels really 2A 2B, so it really could have gone either way there. And you look at Jaden Daniels, his production early on in the season, a little concerning with 4.4 yards average depth of target. But to his point, Jaden Daniels, I think out of this entire quarterback class, he gets rid of the ball the quickest. And you know what, guys? We don't have to wait that much in terms of waiting to see these two face head-to-head. The Commanders and Bears meet here week 8, so not too that far into the season.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting, man. Go ahead, T.
He might be doing it with he's less a receiver now. Hey, we just
right before we started recording.
That's right.
Jahan Dotson getting traded to the Eagles. I'm sure Josh can chime in on that. It's an interesting one for fantasy. I mean, I don't think that the weapons were the reason that we were going to draft Jaden Daniels for fantasy. It's that rushing ability, and I think that low ADOT. I'm really worried the average depth there. The offensive line is a big concern for Washington. He's going to have to get the ball out very quickly. So that's one thing that I've been paying really close attention to. That's one thing that could kind of derail his fantasy season. But yeah, Josh, your thoughts on Dotson getting traded to another team that used to cover the Eagles?
Yeah, just late this morning, news broke and touched base with some folks in Philadelphia. The compensation, Jahan Dotson and a 2025 fifth-round pick in exchange for a third round and 2 seventh-rounders from Philadelphia. You look at Jahan Dotson's trajectory with the Commanders. I mean, obviously he was drafted in the first round by a different regime. You bring in obviously new ownership, new head coach, new OC, and there really was just I think the most telling sign, and we were discussing this offset, but Jahan Dotson starting in the preseason game and basically finishing the preseason games. That's not what you see from a top wide receiver in the league nowadays. So I think the signs were pretty telling. And based on what folks in Philadelphia were telling me, that Howie Roseman, I mean, not only does he check on any notable player that becomes available when their market opens up, but specific to Dotson, this is someone who he had been tracking months into the offseason, in the late portions of last season. So from the Eagles' perspective, they hopefully want to envision Jahan Dotson in this wide receiver 3 role here in the middle, obviously with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith starring on the outside. And just for a little bit of perspective on what was happening there in Philadelphia, rookie Johnny Wilson, a late round pick by the Eagles, he actually was getting a majority of those reps at wide receiver 3. Unfortunately for him, he suffered a concussion recently, so the reps have been split between Paris Campbell and Britton Covey. So here you get a first round profile in terms of Jahan Dotson coming over, and he's got some local ties to the area. He grew up in the region up in Newark. He went to Penn State right down the road from Philadelphia, and just another weapon here for Kellen Moore as he gets creative, obviously with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and you can't forget Saquon Barkley with Jalen Hurts leading it all. So we'll see if Jahan Dotson is able to maximize and really just get creative across the middle.
We'll see, Josh, before we let you go, dude, the new kickoff rule, the dynamic kickoff rule, it's been in effect all preseason long, and I understand you were actually at a press conference this week where league officials were discussing the early returns of the new rule. Give us the goods, Give us the goods, man, and what are league officials saying about how the rule change has affected things like return rate and injuries?
Yeah, earlier in the week, there was a media briefing held by the league that really focused on health and safety, and the kickoff return was certainly one of the hottest topics because just looking at the early returns, pun on words there, but the kickoff return rate is up at 78%, which is up about 21% from the 2023 regular season. Or I'm sorry, it's up about 50% from the 2023 regular season. Yes, in 2023, only about 22% of kickoffs being returned. Now we're almost at 80%. So first off, we're seeing an increase, obviously in field position, which in turn increases excitement around special teams. I mean, it just felt like so often, and obviously the numbers backed it up, that there was really no play happening on these kickoffs. So first off, you're increasing the excitement of the game, but I think the league's biggest push right here is that you're helping with the injury rate, and you're mitigating injury concerns by how the kickoff is set up. But one of the most biggest things that kind of came out of this meeting is NFL Chief Medical Officer Dr. Alan Sills said, obviously sample size matters. It's still small. Nothing's jumped out so far. And he basically alluded that the league is open to making further changes before the regular season. So stay tuned on if that happens. Obviously, them being open to that is a pretty telling sign in terms of like their adaptability as it pertains to this specific rule. If I had to take a firm guess on it, I'd be very surprised if they made further changes. But the fact that they're open to the conversation is just telling in terms of where the game is at as it comes to the kickoff.
So I actually do think that this one's going to be a bit of a work in progress. Josh mentioned the raise or the higher return rates. I think that those are probably a little inflated right now. One, because we're in the preseason, so teams have
trying to make a name for themselves.
you got to make a name for yourselves. You got to also see how this works, right? This is new to everyone, so everyone's returning everything, even the kicks that are going into the end zone. And the kickoff teams are not blasting it through the end zone because they want to practice fielding these kickoffs. But I think that another factor here is we don't quite know how teams are going to look to play this in the regular season because we don't know how good teams are going to be at these returns. So, for example, if I'm a kickoff team and I'm getting data that shows teams are regularly bringing this out past the 30 and occasionally threatening to take it all the way, I'm just putting it through the end zone and giving them the ball at the 30, right? So I do think there is a chance that if we go in that direction, the league will say, okay, we're going to move the touchbacks to 35-yard line. So then there's a bit of a give and take there, but I like what they're doing. And to Josh's point, the main idea here is to make it a safer play that doesn't completely take the kickoff out of the game, and I think they're headed in the right direction.
I will say a quick note for fantasy too. Keep an eye on who the kick returners are now, because things have changed. Teams might want to use their number 2 running back in that scenario, or even potentially late in a game if it's close, they might put one of their stars back there, try to get a big return, try to get a score or great field position. So that could boost some guys' value potentially.
Listen, way less serious note here. I don't know if you guys ever did this. If you're watching, maybe you agree with me, but there's nothing quite like getting home after the bar, or maybe you're having a night in with the boys and you just throw on the YouTube highlights of
Devin Hester.
Some great Devin Hester highlights. And quite frankly, like this style of return that's not really going to hit the same. We don't have the full tilt go of the defense. So
I will say I think that we don't totally know what it's going to be yet, because teams also aren't totally revealing what they're going to do with the kickoff on both sides yet. Yeah. So we could see some creative things. We could see some trick play returns, and like you said, there's going to be some stars back there trying to get some big plays. So it could be fun.
And it's still a work in progress, guys. As we've seen early on, even officials are making mistakes in terms of there was a preseason game involving the Jaguars and the Chiefs, and it was initially ruled a touchback. Doug Peterson argued the Jaguars are awarded a safety. So not everyone's perfect. I mean, to Wilkins' point, teams are obviously trying to be creative in the preseason, but officials also trying to learn this rule here, as we've got 2 weeks left until week 1.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's spring training for everybody. I
right.
suppose that's my baseball is
baseball.
showing. I
Back to
apologize. My
baseball.
baseball is showing.
It's my fault. I started
Josh,
it. I'm sorry.
Please don't hold it against me, dude. Thanks so much for your insight as always. We'll let you go for now, but we'll look forward to chatting again soon, man.
Always a pleasure, guys.
All right, there you go. If I'm putting on a game after the bar, it's going to be the kick six. It's Auburn returning the missed field goal for a touchdown to beat Alabama, because that's what the boys want to watch after a night out.
As long as it's not the Music City Miracle.
No, certainly not. But before we move on, a couple more things I want to talk about, and it's more quarterback stuff. That QB battle in Pittsburgh is whatever the opposite of a clash of the Titans is, because neither Russell Wilson or Justin Fields are running away with that job. Neither have looked terribly impressive running that Steelers offense, and it remains to be seen who ends up getting that job. But T, I'm going to ask you, man, who's going to be running the show for Pittsburgh come week 1?
Maybe this would have been 3 weeks ago. I put out a video with my top 10 defenses for the season, and the Steelers were a top 3 unit for me. Like, this defense is scary. The offense, though, it's anything but scary. Yeah. These two are not there was a Fields highlight of I can't remember who it was, just wide open in the end zone, and it ended up 3 or 4 feet over the receiver's head. I really think, and I felt this way all season, and all off season, I haven't changed my mind on it. I really think it's the most beneficial for this team if they want to maximize their upside and probably maximize their efficiency in their ground game of playing Fields, because of what he offers as a dual threat runner of the ball too. I just really think at this point, I don't really get the addition of Russell Wilson for the Steelers, but then I didn't get why Fields came in after the Wilson acquisition. I do think Fields gives them a better chance of operating their offense at a more efficient rate. I just don't think Wilson has a lot of upside at this point in his career. But man, it's hard. I feel like it's going to be difficult for either one of these guys operating this offense with the loss of Deontay Johnson, a less reliable but can be very explosive George Pickens. Pat Freiermuth hasn't really had a great camp either. So, yeah, I would like to see Fields there, but I just don't think either one of these guys will operate at a really high level.
Yeah, the Steelers have always been pretty conservative with decision-making on things like this.
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin tends to lean on veterans, arguably longer than he should. It took Joey Porter Jr. a while to get in the starting lineup last year, and then he was immediately the best cornerback on the team. That said, I think they are going to start the season with Russ. He was named the starter from the time that they picked him up. They stuck with that messaging after adding Justin Fields, and Justin Fields' play in the preseason hasn't really changed anything there.
Yeah.
Although I'm with you, I would start Fields. I think we know what Russ is at this point. Yeah. He's not really carrying that offense or really adding anything, minor upgrade over Kenny Pickett. So congrats to them for getting him for nothing. I did like that move for that reason, but yeah, I would go with Fields, and just because to me he's the best running quarterback in the league, not named Lamar Jackson. So Arthur Smith knows how to scheme up a run game. You can build an offense around that with the occasional go ball to George Pickens, and then let your defense do the rest. I think with Justin Fields, you have a chance at being a frisky wild card team.
Yeah.
With Russell Wilson, it's probably more the same as last year.
Let's just go back to people management, though. It's easier to start Russ and then make the switch to Fields than it would be to really damage Russ by starting Fields and then ask him to save the day if Fields struggles. So I think that's the way they're going to go. They'll start Russ, but we'll probably see Fields at some point.
I do agree. I will say, though, if Russ doesn't start either at the beginning of the season or at some point in the middle of the season, is there suddenly... No. But is there suddenly drama about... Does he want out? Because he's trying to solidify a Hall of Fame resume here. Is he going to sit as a backup? So if Justin Fields is named the starter tomorrow, is Russ getting cut? Because I don't think he wants to stay, right?
And be the backup. Right?
That's right. And again, I don't know that there's a job out there for him. But I think if he doesn't get the starting job in Pittsburgh, he's probably going to want to look into it, right? So I don't know. It should be interesting.
But then, what contender wants this version of Russell Wilson?
What team?
Running the show for what team? Honestly,
why would I want to play him?
No, I agree, but he'd want to look into it, right? So we'll see.
Yeah, this has a real rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic vibe to it.
Yeah.
And speaking of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, the Las Vegas Raiders just named Gardner Minshew their starting QB over Aiden O'Connell, who was obviously their primary quarterback last season. this doesn't really warrant extended analysis, but Wilkins, as a shameless and inexplicable Raiders fan, where's your head at right now with Minshew at QB1?
Yeah, shameless and inexplicable is a great way of putting it. So thank you. I am not excited about it at all. You can't really get excited about Gardner Minshew as your quarterback in a league that has so many superstars. In fairness, I don't think the Raiders quarterback play was going to be very good, regardless of who was going to win that job. But to me, O'Connell was the better fit as like a pocket passer who could at least play a semi-efficient point guard for a pretty interesting cast of playmakers. I think you even saw a little bit of that down the stretch last year, including that 63-point game. That was against the Chargers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you were probably checked out by then. But
Playoff lock Chargers.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Minshew, to me, he doesn't really have the arm talent, the accuracy and decision making come and go, and he's a mobile guy who can extend plays, and I think that was probably the deciding factor here, but that also ends up in him escaping the pocket probably more than he should and leaving throws on the field. So it's tough because I think, Boone, you'd probably agree, I really like the way this roster is set up aside from the quarterback position, specifically at the playmakers. I think they're going to do some really good things out of 12 personnel with Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer on the field at the same time. You got a really good receiver tandem in Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and the defense was even second in EPA per play down the stretch last season after Antonio Pierce took over. So,
Yeah, Easton Stick helped.
yeah, it was a pretty favorable stretch of quarterback play down there that they went against, but they also did go against Tua and Patrick Mahomes. So
Nick Mullins.
Yes.
What was that game? 3-0?
Oh, that was Josh Dobbs, and then they benched him for Nick Mullins.
Oh, okay.
But the point stands. I think they are in a good spot outside of quarterback, but this is a quarterback-driven league. So this is all a recipe for a quarterback purgatory. Their quarterbacks are not good enough for them to be a contending team. The rest of the roster is probably good enough that they're not going to be picking at the top of the draft. So like we said last week, this is probably a team that's going to have its eye on the Dak Prescott situation and hoping that Jerry Jones finds a way to mess it up, and probably sitting there with a blank check if he does.
Yeah. I'm just glad we had Wilkins here to talk about the Raiders because I can't imagine we really wanted to.
Listen, I know you're high on Brock Bowers, though.
Well, I'm trying to get one of the top, and don't spoil this because we're going to talk about tight ends next week,
Okay.
I think, but I'm trying to get one of the top 7 tight ends.
Yeah.
If I don't, then Bowers at his price is certainly someone that I'll take a shot on for fantasy, an elite prospect and a guy that just kind of has some unknown upside. I'll take that shot.
Yeah, they're lining him up out wide, in line, and in the backfield, so he's going to get some carries too.
Sure.
So that'll be interesting. The quarterback play will not be. So
Man, so speaking of tight ends, do you guys see that Travis Kelce is going to be in Happy Gilmore too?
yes.
I saw Adam Sandler spoil what I think
He
was
did,
probably
yeah.
supposed to be a surprise cameo, but yeah.
Yeah, man, 30 years later, almost 30 years later, Adam Sandler's doing the sequel. There's no way that Travis Kelce's cameo could possibly trump Bob Barker's performance in the original, but he'll give it his best shot, I'm sure. Boone, I want to ask you, who's more goated in their respective field, Travis Kelce or Adam Sandler?
I don't know, man. I mean, I'm going to go with the football guy, right? Like, Kelsey's one of the best tight ends ever. He's also a phenomenal guy, it seems like, a great host on SNL. He's putting together, like, a really good resume. Adam Sandler, yeah, he's great, but my things that I like from him came out, like 20 years ago? Like, the new stuff, it's not really for me, maybe a little more family-oriented. I don't know if I'm the right guy to ask, but for me, I would say Kelce.
Tell you what, if you asked me this last year, I'd say Adam Sandler. Ask me this year, Travis Kelce has had a huge glow up in the pop culture department.
He has?
We might have to go with Kelce.
But yeah, Boone was talking about how he's been aging himself. He didn't even bring up Taylor Swift. You got to mention that.
He
when
doesn't
you talk
know
about
who
his
Taylor
goat
Swift
stats.
No, I mean, I think it has to be Kelce, only because Kelce has been a superstar his entire career. Adam Sandler is firmly in his decline phase, right? Like, don't get me wrong. When he broke into the league, he was putting up big numbers. Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, right? The Waterboy. Like, banger after banger, he was elite, right? 1-1. Now, the last 25 years, okay, yeah, Uncut Gems, really good. Otherwise, a lot of forgettable stuff. So I would say because Kelce sustained his excellence his entire career, whereas Sandler, big decline phase, I'm leaning Kelce.
I'm trying to picture what Kelsey's role is going to be.
Is he going to fight him?
One would hope.
That would be
Or
awesome.
he could
right?
be the new intimidator on the golf course for him.
I will say they're both doing great in life. Adam Sandler's got it figured out. Even though I think maybe we're not his target audience anymore, he's got it figured out. He hangs out with his friends. He's making these projects, making a ton of money. So no shots at Adam Sandler.
No,
he's
come
doing
on.
it right.
Look, Adam Sandler shaped my personality for a good third of my life. You know, those seminal Adam Sandler films where they played a big role.
I thought it was mostly Simpsons and Seinfeld.
Well, that too, you know. It's a rich tapestry. Anyways, as much as this is an NFL show, don't get it twisted. This is an NFL show. We would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit of college football with the season starting imminently and with a new era starting in the world of college football. The college football playoff, after many years of being a 4-team tournament, has expanded this year. It's going to be 12 teams in that tournament, much more comprehensive. And, you know, in case you weren't paying attention, last year it was Michigan who won it all. They won their first national championship since 1997. They staved off that kind of that controversy with the sign stealing to emerge as national champs. And if you look at them coming into the season, they're in the top 10. The teams ahead of them, usual suspects. Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they're all in the top 5. But T, I want to ask you, the dude rocking the Hawaii jersey, which is absolutely mint, by the way.
For anyone. People are like, what is this guy doing?
We talked about it so much before the show that no one brought it up on the show.
Yeah, it's true. It's impressive. But I want to know, man, you know, outside of the usual suspects, who are some sleeper teams that could find their way into the expanded college football playoff this year?
Yeah, 12 teams leaves a lot of opportunity. Hawaii actually plays week 0, Florida State and Georgia Tech being the big game. But there's 2 teams I really like this year as potential sleepers to get in. The door is wide open for, you know, group of 5 teams to get in, but there's 2 teams in some of the bigger conferences I really like. This is an educational session for everybody because Boone was like, you know, not going to talk about things that we're not have a vast knowledge on.
I'm big on the prospects that are coming out and are going to make it to the NFL and factor in for fantasy. I am not huge in following college football, so I'm glad you're here.
I can tell you about one. I think Connor Wegman, the quarterback at Texas A&M, has a very good chance of potentially being a first-round pick. He only played 4 games last year, but was very, very good in terms of completion percentage, taking care of the ball. Turnover-worthy play rate is a great thing to look at for players that don't have a ton of experience. But A&M has a lot of talent. They fired Jimbo Fisher, who actually had in 2022 the best recruiting class of the modern era, but he's gone. Mike Elko is in. He used to be at Duke and took a Duke team that was 3-9 to back-to-back 8+ win seasons. So he's a great in-game coach. The big thing for A&M is have a ton of talent, like I mentioned with the Jimbo class. So the defense is very, very strong. Shamar Turner, they actually just got the Nick Scorton, who led the Big Ten in sacks last year from Purdue. So the defensive line is always very, very good. The offense, I think, should be better. They got Moose Muhammad and Noah Musa Muhammad and then Noah Stewart, at wide receiver, former 4-star recruits. But the schedule is good. Now that the SEC has expanded, they played Alabama since, I believe, 2015. Don't have them on the schedule. Don't have Georgia on the schedule. Don't have Ole Miss, who's expected to have a big year after a big year with the recruiting or the transfer portal, and they don't get Texas, who's seen to be, you know, of the top 4, the 3rd or 4th of that group until the last game of the season. You guys can see it here. So a very soft schedule, a very good opportunity to stack up, maybe get to 10 or 11 wins before that game against Texas. This is a team that benefits from a really easy schedule with a ton of talent and a much better in-game coach. So that's one. And the second is Iowa State. They're in the Big 12. They're a very young team that actually benefit from the second most returning production. Returning production is a massive indicator of success in college football, having continuity that you're flipping the roster over every single year. This team has 10 starters back on offense, 9 on defense, and on offense capitalized with the Big 12 Freshman Offensive Player of the Year in Rocco Becht. He had a great freshman season, threw 20 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He's got his 2-star receivers back in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. Their running back, as a freshman, Abu Sama, averaged over 7 yards a carry, and their entire offensive line returns. This offense could be really good. It was already a top 20 unit throwing the football last year, again with the freshman quarterback. The defense is usually their calling card with Matt Campbell's team. They got their safeties back. They sent TJ Tampa to the NFL, but their secondary should still be really good. The defensive line was top 30 against the run. This is a team that you can get at like 10-1 to make the college football playoff, and I think they're going to be one of the stronger teams in the Big 12. So those are 2 teams that are not typically expected to make it, have never been to the college football playoff in the 4-team format, that will really benefit from the 12-team and could be teams you see getting double-digit wins. So those are 2 of my favorites that not a lot of people will be paying attention to, especially A&M. They typically fall well short of expectations. So look out for those 2 teams this year, and could not be more excited for the college football season start this weekend.
Yeah, man, it's a totally different ballgame, and I have to ask one follow-up purely for the benefit of my dad. Can Notre Dame win a national championship this year?
Well, they actually play. I didn't even mention this on that Notre Dame's or on that A&M schedule. They play Notre Dame week 1. Notre Dame's replacing Joe Alt. Actually sent their other tackle Fisher to the NFL too, and then they had a prized left tackle that they had as an underclassman who actually tore his pec and is out for the year. And I mentioned how good that A&M defensive line is. They play that game at home. Notre Dame, that's probably their toughest game on the schedule, so that's probably one loss to start the year. So I don't think this team's ready to win a national title, but their quarterback, Riley Leonard, who was actually at Duke with Mike Elko, is a ton of fun. So he can maybe navigate the poor offensive line. I could see 10-2.
All right.
Yeah, I will say that's probably part of the benefit of this new college football playoff setup, right? Is that one loss doesn't completely sink your season.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see how it shakes out.
Yeah, I think the two big conferences in the SEC and Big Ten will get a lot of teams in, and then everybody else will be kind of pushing to fill the gaps.
Right on. Thanks so much, T. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Justin Boone for your weekly dose of delicious, hot fantasy football content.
Yeah, we had Wilkins for the Raiders segment. We had Tyler for the college football. We're saving the best for last, guys. Let's get over to the screen here. And I want to start here by saying that I feel so much better than last week. We didn't touch on this on the show, guys. Last week, I was in bad shape. I made it through the show. When I got here last week, I felt like I was going to throw up. I told everyone that. I had food poisoning like 24 hours before, a day or two after the show. And yet I made it through, guys. And that fantasy segment, if you look back, like we should have a picture of it we put up on the screen here or something. I was looking rough. I was looking pale. The shirt was all disheveled. But this week, I'm feeling so much better. I'm glad for that. And I'm here to talk about wide receivers, what you should be doing with wide receiver in your drafts, some breakouts, some busts, some sleepers, just like we've been doing every week so far. We talked about quarterbacks 2 weeks ago, running backs last week, and now we're going to go through receivers. So let's start with draft strategy. And you see the list behind me here. If I can, I want to end up with 2 of these guys. I want to go heavy with receiver at the top of my draft. I mentioned last week, I like hero RB or anchor RB, that approach. I want to get 1 running back early. But after that, those first 4 rounds, I want 3 receivers if I can. I want to load up that part of my roster. I don't want to have to worry about receivers later in the draft. So you get those 3 early in the first 4 rounds. Round 5, again, not to spoil tight ends here. Round 5, you try to get one of the elite guys that are still on the board. And then from round 6, round 7, round 8, I want 1 running back, I want 1 quarterback, and then I want 1 more receiver, and that's because there's still a lot of good receivers in that range, guys that are going to have guaranteed volume, and then the drop-off kind of starts to happen after that, and then you're just kind of throwing darts at guys at that point. So let's get into the breakouts here, because that's, if you can hit on one of these breakouts, that is going to make your life so much easier. And let's start with a guy that I really like. I talk about the Falcons so much this year because I think they are going to be one of the best teams out there in the league with all the improvements that they've made. Drake London. You see him at the bottom of that list there. Now you see his stats. And the last 2 seasons, he has dealt with some of the worst quarterback play in the league. He still managed to put up okay stats. Had 866 yards 2 years ago. Had 905 yards last year. Doing it with quarterbacks like Desmond Ridder and Marcus Mariota. Just terrible. And if you want to know exactly how bad it was, he's been in the bottom 8 the last 2 years in completion, in catchable target rate. That is so awful for him. But this year, they go out and they solve that problem. They get Kirk Cousins. They get Michael Penix Jr. to back up Cousins just in case he gets hurt, right? So they've figured out the quarterback situation. They have a new coaching staff there. That's going to be exciting. Zach Robinson bringing over that Sean McVay system we expect. This year, Drake London, we're finally going to see it all come together. A former first-round pick who is going to be a wide receiver 1 in fantasy. Now, if we want to go a little bit further down the board, another guy that I really like that you can get in that round 6, round 7, round 8 range, Jackson Smith-Njigba on the Seahawks. We've mentioned this on the show already. Ryan Grubb is going to come in for the Seahawks and very, very much improve that offensive attack. All the players are talking about it. It's going to be more explosive. They're going to push the ball downfield more. And if you think back to last year, what happened with JSN, he joins a team where, okay, they had DK Metcalf. They had Tyler Lockett, right? So we kind of knew it was going to be tough for him at the start, even though he was a first-round pick. Then he breaks his wrist in August. That is devastating for any rookie. He's missing valuable reps. So early in the season, wasn't doing much. But as the year went along, we started to see a little bit from him. Over the last 12 weeks last season, 50% of his games, he had double-digit fantasy points. Now this year, with the new system, I'm expecting we're going to see him overtake Tyler Lockett, who's now 32 years old. JSN is going to have a breakout campaign. Could be a wide receiver 3 for fantasy, maybe even better this season. And I know I'm running through a bunch of stuff here. I want to give you guys an opportunity to potentially ask some questions. Do you guys have anything so far based on what I've said?
Yeah, I love the JSN call. I'm a big fan of Ryan Grubb's offense and what he's going to bring to Seattle. And having looked at your rankings, I know that might be surprising to you, but I noticed that you are higher than consensus on all of the Seahawks receivers. That's DK Metcalf, JSN, and Tyler Lockett. So I know you're expecting big things from this offense. If I'm in a range where I get one or even two of those guys, is it a big galaxy brain theory of mine that I could just wait on quarterback and pair him up with Geno Smith at the end of the draft?
You could. I think you're taking unnecessary risk at that point.
Okay.
And you weren't here a couple weeks ago when we talked about quarterbacks. There's 12 or 13 really good fantasy quarterbacks this season. So you don't really have to go out and kind of wait until the later rounds. Like we've done in years past, you wait until the late rounds, you grab one, maybe two guys. You don't really have to do that this year if we're talking about, regular redraft leagues, single quarterback kind of leagues. 2 quarterback, super flex leagues. For sure, in best ball, that's more what we're talking about. You want to think about those cheaper stacks that you can make. You want to go out and get a Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice. You want to stack those guys. It's going to cost you quite a bit. Seahawks, you could do it much, much cheaper. So I like that for those formats. If you're in best ball, if you're in a really big tournament, you want to look at those kind of options. But in regular leagues, you don't have to worry too much about stacking. It's not as important.
See, I got a bit of a challenge in my home league. There's a bunch of guys who, for some reason, like to draft their second quarterback before I even draft my first. So I don't know what to do in that situation. So I often end up with a guy like Geno. So that's kind of why I ask. And yeah, I just expect big things for the Seahawks offense. And there's a lot of mouths to feed, but I think they can do it.
Are you in a league with Boone here? Because he had Geno as a sleeper on his quarterbacks. He's kind of like, oh, why don't you just leave Geno alone?
No, he's hustling you, man.
I'm not in a league with Boone right now.
We have been over the years.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm going to be in the office league this year, but I guess my follow-up question to all that is, how do you recommend we use all of this information against you in the leagues that we're in with you?
You have it open on your laptop while you're drafting. You use it all. The Score Fantasy Football Draft Kit, it's loaded with all my content. You can get it for free at The Score. You can listen to the Score Fantasy Football podcast. We're putting out multiple episodes right now. That'll crank up even more during the season. Just tons of information in there. And I know there's a lot of people in the office that are using my rankings. I even know some people, we won't mention any names, but one person that we work with, they're in a league with their wife and some of their friends' wives and some of their buddies. And their wife actually won the league one year and specifically cited that she used my rankings when she did it. So I love hearing that. That is fantastic. And I will mention, talking about the Seahawks, I'm going to mention one more guy a little bit later. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about him near the very end. But let's go the opposite way now. Let's talk about some of the bust candidates. And I hate doing this. I hate getting negative with it. These guys, I don't dislike them. They're great players for sure. It's just about the cost this year. And their situation's changing a little bit. So the first one is Michael Pittman on the Colts. And I've talked a lot about the Colts and liking them this season. So maybe you're surprised that I'm a little bit down on Pittman. Part of it is because he's going in the 3rd round of fantasy drafts. That's a very expensive price for a guy who I think there's a lot of reasons why he had a breakout season last year. And things are sort of shifting in a different way for him. And last year, he was kind of the man in that Colts offense. Jonathan Taylor missed a big chunk of the beginning of the year. Later in the season, he really got back to himself. But what else did they have? Josh Downs was a rookie. He dealt with some injuries. They really didn't have other options. Anthony Richardson got hurt. When that happened, Gardner Minshew comes in and just starts peppering Pittman with targets. He ends up with 109 catches, finishes as the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. Now you cut to this year. We have other guys. They draft A.D. Mitchell in the 2nd round. Josh Downs is hurt right now. He is going to be back eventually. And prior to that injury, people were very excited about what he's going to be able to do this season in that offense. And Jonathan Taylor is going to enter the year healthy this time around, on top of the fact that Minshew is gone Anthony Richardson is back, and Anthony Richardson, they're going to run the ball quite a bit. This is a dual threat quarterback. I don't envision the same kind of scenario as Pittman had last year where he's just getting peppered with targets. So I think that's going to be a problem for him. I think he's going to take a bit of a step back. Not a guy that I want to spend up for in the third round. Now, if we go to another guy that could potentially flop this year, Keenan Allen. And again, I want to say, I still think that Keenan Allen has a ton of talent. He's a player that is going to age fairly gracefully. I think he has the route running ability where he can continue to produce well into his 30s, but he is completely changing into a new situation. He's going from the Chargers, where last year Mike Williams was hurt and he got all the targets. He led the league with 11.5 targets per game. This season, he's in Chicago. DJ Moore is the lead receiver there. They spent a top 10 pick on Rome Odunze. They have other weapons like Cole Kmet at tight end, like Gerald Everett at tight end, like DeAndre Swift, who, yes, maybe not the best fantasy option, but somebody else that's going to command some targets in that offense. And the reports that we've heard about Keenan Allen this year, I don't know if he's 230 pounds like we heard at one point, but he does look a little bit bigger out there. Could it just be a veteran who's kind of getting back in shape for the season? For sure, but I'm concerned that he's going to go from the Chargers, where he was getting all those targets, to this Bears offense where he's now fighting with these other receivers. And as the year goes along, is that top 10 rookie in Odunze going to start to overtake him potentially in two receiver sets? Those are my concerns there, guys. I know as the resident Chargers fan, Tyler, you're going to have something to say about this, I'm guessing. Are you in or out on Keenan Allen this year?
Yeah, Keenan's my favorite football player of all time. I definitely don't think what you're saying is wrong at all. I do think, Father Time has gotten every single guy at the receiving spots, but, he's looked better aging than a Julio Jones even. My question to you is more, I guess, because, I'm still willing to have Keenan on my fantasy team. I think a lot of people hear bust and they think, absolutely under no circumstance draft. How do you feel about these two guys? Is there a time in your draft that you might still be willing to take them? Or are you just so razor focused on where you're addressing next? Or is there an ADP or a number you draft either one of these guys?
That is a great point. There really isn't any player that's a complete avoid for me. If they fall several rounds, I'm more than willing to take them in that range. So for Pittman, if he fell to like the late fourth, I would start to consider him there. For Allen, if he fell a round or so, I would start to consider him there. For example, and I'm switching over to running back for this one, but J.K. Dobbins, who I'm very worried about with the Achilles and everything, I took him in the last round of a draft on the weekend just because he fell that far. So I'm willing to take almost anybody if the value presents itself. I think that's a very good point. Mm-hmm. Now, let's move on to a sleeper. I'm just going to give you one because, like I said at the top, I normally don't want to spend those late picks at receiver. I think it's much more valuable to be grabbing running backs in that range, those high upside guys. For every Puka Nacua that's out there, you got him in the late rounds, it is very difficult. There are tons of just average or potential bust guys that are available in that range. So I don't want to be wasting those bullets there. I want to be taking those running backs. But there is somebody going after the 10th round that you can get that I think is in a really good spot. I don't understand why he's being devalued. It is Brandon Cooks on the Cowboys. We've seen this guy produce before. He's done it his whole career. And then last year in that Cowboys offense, when they finally figured things out, it kind of took them until week 6. I've mentioned this a bunch of times. That was when they started to realize, okay, we're going to have to throw the ball a ton here. From that point on, Dak Prescott was the QB1 overall in fantasy. From that point on, CeeDee Lamb was the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy. And from that point on, Brandon Cooks was the wide receiver 25 in fantasy points per game. You're able to get him right now outside of the top 50 receivers, sometimes outside of the top 60 receivers. And this has nothing to do with CeeDee Lamb and the contract issues. I imagine they're going to get that all sorted out. This is just because the Cowboys didn't really add anybody else. I thought they were going to. They haven't. They're really expecting the Jalen Tolbert, Jalen Brooks, these other guys to step up. They still have Jake Ferguson at tight end. The running back room is arguably worse than last year now, so Cooks is in a really nice spot. And a lot of the beat writers have pointed out that this season, another year to build chemistry with Dak Prescott, that he's looked really good in practices. So I like him as somebody that you can get very, very late and potentially be a wide receiver 3 or at least a flex in your lineup. So if you end up waiting really, really long for that next wide receiver, you can get him there. Now, the thing everybody wants to know, and this is why we always finish off with it, who are the receivers who are going to lead me to a fantasy title? And I will remind everyone, you can go to the Score Fantasy Football Draft Kit. I write an article every year, 7 players who are going to lead you to a fantasy title. There's players at every single position. I put 3 receivers in there. I'm going to talk about 2 of them today. I'm going to make you go check out the third one in the draft kit and in that article. And the first guy that I want to mention, Garrett Wilson on the Jets. This would have happened last year. If Aaron Rodgers had stayed healthy last year all season long, Garrett Wilson right now would be talked about along with Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase as one of the truly elite receivers in the NFL. Now Rodgers is back. All of the reports coming out of practice are he is just lighting it up. They have a great connection. Garrett Wilson was able to put up over 1,000 yards and over 80 catches each of the last 2 years with terrible, maybe the worst quarterback play in the league. Now he gets Aaron Rodgers, so very excited about him joining that top 5 potentially at the position. And then the other guy, I saved it till the end, that other Seahawks player, DK Metcalf. And we've already seen DK Metcalf put up a ceiling season. He did it back in 2020, had over 1,300 yards, had a great touchdown total, finished as the wide receiver 8 in fantasy points per game that year. So he can be a wide receiver 1 for fantasy. Now, the last 3 seasons, wide receiver 21, wide receiver 27, wide receiver 20, but going back to Ryan Grubb showing up, going back to the new coaching staff, the offensive line hopefully being a little better this year, some better injury luck, and then bringing in a few reinforcements at tight end just in case some of those guys get injured again. I'm very excited about what DK Metcalf could do, and his new head coach, Mike McDonald, talked about how they want to use him this year. They want to move him around the formation. They want to make it tough on defenses to focus on him. I love hearing that. They've also talked about wanting to give him as many targets as possible. They acknowledge what kind of weapon he could be in this offense, and going back to everything I said about JSN, about Geno Smith, about that Seahawks passing attack and that Seahawks offense as a whole, I can't wait to see what DK Metcalf is going to do this year. I think he could potentially be a wide receiver 1 again for fantasy, guys.
Well, I mean, my question, look, there's a certain discomfort I think that comes with making any Jets wideout the anchor of your wide receiving core. Garrett Wilson has 7 career touchdowns. You know, is that just a function of the quarterbacks he's played with the last couple seasons, or is there something about him in the red zone? Essentially, talk me off the ledge about Garrett Wilson, because, dude,
the red zone was it. I was looking. Remember we were talking about the Jags numbers, struggles. The Jets, I'm pretty sure, might have had historically one of the worst red zone offenses I've ever seen. They were scoring touchdowns at a less than a 30% rate.
Dude,
inside the 20.
He had 1 touchdown after week 2 last season, and yeah, I get it. The quarterback play was shoddy to say the least, but just talk me off the ledge with Wilson.
No, I'm blaming that all on the quarterback play. I think we've seen more than enough from him. The fact that he was able to produce with those quarterbacks, even though the touchdowns weren't there, I think there's a few players on that Jets offense, and I don't want to spoil the tight end episode next week, but there's a few players in that offense that I think are going to have a much better chance to put up a decent touchdown total, and that's going to lift them up for fantasy as well. So no, I have zero concerns about Garrett Wilson. Him going at the end of the first round right now is a lot nicer when he was going at the beginning of the second round earlier in the offseason, but because of some of the injuries to Jahmyr Gibbs and Puka Nacua, now he's kind of slid up into that first round, but I'm still more than willing to take him there. Come back around, you got to get that running back at some point in that range, whether it's in the second or the third, but Garrett Wilson is going to be somebody we're very happy to have on your fantasy team this season.
All right, there you go. You heard it here first. Booney, thank you as always for the wisdom, and that'll do it for us here at No Timeouts. Once again, that's Justin Boone, that's Tyler MacKillop, that's Dan Wilkins. I'm Jonah Birnbaum. We'll see you next time.